Again, we get me on screen. Hi again. I just got done reacting to part 6 of Sunday with his friends in the back rooms. Now I'm reacting to what if Darth Vader became a wandering in the forest from PPSW. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And I'll put his channel in the description below so you can check out doing this video for yourself. Let's get started.
Special thanks to N-Savers for sponsoring our 125,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to find out how you can win one of 6 lightsabers, check the pinned comment down below.
Hello.
Our story begins inside the Death Star, where Lord Vader was making his way to the interrogation room. Leia had resisted traditional interrogation methods, and Vader was tired of waiting around. They needed to find the rebel base so they could end the rebellion and continue forward with their rule over the galaxy. Leia was tired of this consistent back and forth all day. The interrogation droids weren't getting anywhere, and Vader was becoming impatient. Similar to how Leia was able to resist interrogation as a child, she was able to resist here. Her mind was like a barricade, and Vader was ready to just do the probing himself. Initially, he saw it as a waste of time. Leia was 19 years old, and he rightfully assumed she would break sooner or later. Now that she had gone several hours without giving an inch, he stormed across the Death Star and into her cell. She looked at him displeasingly, as if to say, "You again?" She inquired if he was going to make his boss do the interrogation since he was so incapable. Vader looked at her. That was one hell of an attitude. He wondered where she got it because from what little he remembered, neither Bail nor Brea had such a boisterous personality. Vader stepped into the room without anyone else and walked into her direction. She asked if he was going to try this by himself, and without saying a word, he raised his hand and allowed the Force to crawl out of it. She didn't budge, similar to how she had with the third sister all those years before. Her father's blood ran strong within her, and the mind of her mother was a fortress. Vader found that he initially had his own struggles with this. He obviously wasn't going full power, but he even was surprised by her resilience. Sure, he wasn't giving it his all, but he had to acknowledge that this was impressive. For a child to go unnoticed by the Empire was uncommon, especially a child with such an avid connection to the Force. It likely had to do with her being a senator's daughter as it was. While he was probing her mind, he was still running into a brick wall. It was one wall after another, and his own mind started to drift elsewhere. It wasn't that he wasn't interested in getting to the bottom of this, but she was very clearly gifted. Such an odd thing. Anyways, Vader applied more and more pressure. Each additional push was subtle. He knew that if he wasn't careful, he would overload her mind and potentially do long-term damage, which in the long run, he didn't care about. But at the moment, he needed the whereabouts to the rebel base. Until she handed over that information, he needed to be gentle. As he pressed further, she revealed more information, but none of it being about the rebel base. Leia was entirely focused on not giving up the base at Yavin. She was allowing every other memory to become visible to Vader. He pushed for the Yavin base but couldn't find it. He found Chopper based on a Talon. He saw memories from Alderaan. He could see Bail and Brea Organa. He then came across memories from her adolescence. She was a girl that Reva brought to Fortress Inquisitorius. Vader didn't lock onto that memory too hard because he had more important things to find, but that kept his mind preoccupied. However, despite his desire to find the rebel base, he went further and further back, all the way back. Leia had a memory of her mother. She was beautiful but sad. That was all she knew, but Vader knew this person. He felt her essence the moment the memory popped up, and within an instant he saw twins, Obi-Wan and Padme, inside of a medical room. He snapped his hand back and realized that there was something more to this. She was a twin, but where was her brother? Vader piped up, demanding to know where her brother was. She was very confused by this. Which brother? She was an only child. Vader turned to her and asked if she saw what he saw. She was even more confused now. She hadn't seen a thing. All she knew is he was raising his hand at her and doing something. Leia was completely unaware that he had access to her mind and her memories. She told him that if he was done frolicking around, she would like to get her rest, seeing as they wouldn't let her out of the cell. Vader struck up a conversation instead, informing her of everything he saw. To Vader, this signaled a chance to have an ally. Leia was his daughter, and he couldn't be happier. He finally had someone to drag into the depths of the dark side. In what would become an hour-long session, the two of them would speak back and forth about everything. Vader would reveal what he saw inside of her mind, and informing her that he was her father. He said that for some reason, she and her twin brother were split up, unless he passed away, but he wanted to form an alliance with her. Vader could tell simply based on the interrogations that she was strong-willed and minded, so getting her to become his apprentice wouldn't be easy. His only hope was to escape from the clutches of his evil mentor. He told her that the dark side was strong with her, and if she committed to it, they could overthrow the Emperor together. They could make things the way they wanted them to be. He promised that if she joined him, they could save her allies, and they wouldn't have to worry about the overarching power of the Empire. This was actually something that gave her hope, but somewhere in the conversation he slipped up, and she saw right through it. Having spent her entire life surrounded by 2 lifetime politicians, she knew how to read people. She was also naturally good at it because she was Force sensitive. Leia realized that her father was attempting to pull her to the dark side instead of righting his own wrongs. She played into it. At this point, if her father was willing to get her off this station, then she could protect the rebels. If she had to bite the blaster, as it were, then she would, all in greater service of the galaxy. Vader simply did what his master did to him. He played the entire situation as if he was out of control and that he'd been trying to gain that control again. He did everything he could to really make it seem as if there was a path forward for the two of them as father and daughter. At the end of his spiel, he told her that they could find her brother, if he was still alive, and teach him the ways of the Force, and they could finally be a family again. Leia just had one simple question for her father, and it sat on the tip of her tongue. She wanted so badly to say it, but she knew saying it wouldn't do her any good. She just wanted to ask what happened to her mother, and why she was sad. But if she wanted to escape, then she couldn't be herself. She needed to play this little game and get off this station. Leia agreed to Vader's proposal, and he was overjoyed. He told her that he would return to her in a few minutes and bring her to the observation deck, informing her that they played this ruse with Tarkin before getting her to safety aboard his personal destroyer. It was in the area, but it was about to depart for another location because Tarkin didn't believe any extra resources needed to be used in the protection of the Death Star. That was already proven during the Battle of Scarif, according to Tarkin. Regardless, these few minutes gave Leia ample time to plan out how she'd be able to escape everything. She could probably use a mouse droid or astromech inside Vader's ship to contact allies and tell them of her location. She knew that General Syndulla would likely be able to successfully rescue her if it came to it. In the coming moments, Vader would return, as father and daughter made their way to Tarkin's command deck. He was simply overlooking the planet of Alderaan, and he gave Leia an ultimatum: identify the rebel base or watch her home planet be destroyed. As a result, she told Tarkin that the rebels were on Dantooine. The icy cold Moff turned to his gunners and told them to prepare for an attack on Alderaan. As they prepared themselves, Vader intervened, suggesting that the Emperor would not approve of such an attack. If they wanted to stop the rebels, it would be more effective if they made a public display of the traitors. Alderaan was a core world. It was too valuable to the Emperor. This was an odd position for Vader. He didn't actually want to aid the rebels, and he wanted Palpatine to look bad, but he also wouldn't allow his daughter to suffer from the loss of her home world. Tarkin could tell something was going on here, but he wouldn't disobey Vader simply because he brought the Emperor into this conversation. Tarkin and Vader were in a weird predicament as it was. They both outranked each other, but they were also close to the Emperor. Technically speaking, Vader outranked Tarkin, but Tarkin was assigned to the Death Star, so who knew? All Tarkin knew is he was going to maintain control over his weapon. Vader also said that he would investigate the surface of the planet himself, and afterwards, they'd bring the Princess of Alderaan to the Emperor for personal interrogation. Tarkin nodded his head and played the little game, and once Vader and Leia left, he told his personal deck-hand to bring all the tapes from the detention level cell that Organa was housed in. He wanted to see every single moment of the tape. In the transport from the Death Star to the Devastator, Vader told Leia his whole plan, and she actually liked it. Not in a liking it just to get it over with idea, but in a it genuinely worked kind of way. She was pleased that her homeworld would be protected. Once they landed, he informed her that she would be kept safe inside the Devastator until his return. He took a personal shuttle to the planet of Alderaan as the capital ship moved a bit closer to the atmosphere without penetrating it. Vader intended on finding out if the rebels actually had a base here. There needed to be an ample reason for the Empire to make a move or an example of the planet. He knew that Leia would be heartbroken if he allowed Tarkin to destroy her home world, and so he saved it. He was very hopeful that this action would bridge the gap between he and her. As he was on the planet, Tarkin looked over everything he saw from the recordings and saw that Vader was intent on betraying the Empire. Without even a second of hesitation, he informed the technicians on the command bridge to fire. As Vader was walking around the planet of Alderaan, he felt the chill, like hair standing up on your arm before lightning strikes, and he turned his head. Similar to how Krennic met his fate, Vader looked up into a green flash from the Death Star. He was defenseless. As the weapon powered up, he looked to where Tarkin would be and raged. He couldn't believe that this would happen to him. Vader's stillness wasn't matched by the massive amount of panic and chaos around him, and within a matter of mere seconds the entire planet was detonated, and Vader with it. However, when all seemed lost, he felt himself floating into the air. He looked around and saw nothing but debris. His personal Star Destroyer was so close to the planet that the explosion sent chunks of tectonic plates into space, one of them smashing through the midsection of the Star Destroyer, ripping it into half. Vader was so angry. He wanted to kill that fool so badly. Then he realized, how was he alive? There wasn't a direct explanation for it, but he was so focused on the dark side of the Force that when all the death around him happened at the same time, he was thrown into a well of the Force and reduced to a wound in it. The destruction of Alderaan was an unfixable scar that the Force now had to live with, and a product of such damage was Vader. It was a right place, right time type of thing, or wrong place, wrong time, depending on one's own perspective. Vader made his way towards the Death Star so he could deal with Tarkin himself. He still hadn't realized that he was moving without his armor, so he was literally nothingness moving into the ship and walking within it. No one saw him, and no one knew where he was. As he returned to the command bridge, he found Tarkin levitating off the ground. Over hologram was Darth Sidious, who was beyond upset. He couldn't believe Tarkin would act so rashly. This project became an obsession for him, and now he wished he had protected Krennic. At least Krennic would have remained loyal to the Emperor's word. Foolish Imperial officers, a lot of them. Sidious choked Tarkin until his neck snapped and he dropped to the ground. Aside from the fact that he destroyed Alderaan, Sidious was fuming because of not just Vader's apparent death, but the disappearance of the Organa child. She could have been Vader's replacement. It was whiplash for the wound of the Force. He thought for a moment that Sidious actually cared about him, only to realize that was most certainly not the case. Sidious didn't want his pupil dead because he still had use. Now that he was gone, Sidious needed another. At least there was some knowledge. There was a boy who belonged to Anakin Skywalker. The daughter must have been killed by the blast, so they might as well turn their attention towards the Skywalker boy and find him. That offspring could be turned into the next student of the dark side. Sidious informed the Death Star to disperse. Even though the Senate was torn down, there would still be cause for it to be reinstated with the destruction of Alderaan. Vader realized that with his daughter gone, he needed to figure out who his son was and where to find him. Another thing, Vader desired a means of transportation. There was so much about what he was now that he did not understand. However, he did realize he had a desire to eat. He wanted to harvest the Force from others around him. He wondered if his suit would make a suitable host until they found a proper being to transfer into. He didn't know, but there was something oddly terrifying about having no physical presence. But it was cool, because he could harvest the life of those from around him without them knowing who did it. Stormtroopers would turn a corner and see a bundle of dead people and assume it was because of some other reasons, like perhaps there were rebels inside the base that were trying to find the princess. The Death Star went to lockdown for no reason because of this, and Yularen took complete control over the Death Star as he was the one appointed by Palpatine. Yularen was loyal to a fault, so he would reroute the space station away from their current location. It would take a while for the engines to get going, but as they started to jump the hyperspace sequence, he could focus on finding out who was inside the starship causing a ruckus. Vader was thriving. Feasting off the lowly was very enchanting for him. He didn't actually require a lot, just a little bit, and he was content. But he enjoyed watching the stormtroopers panic. They were helpless, and they acted that way whenever one of their cohorts dropped in front of them. Anyways, enough messing around. Vader needed to get back to Mustafar so he could put himself into some sort of physical form. Before the Death Star jumped into hyperspace, he'd find a stormtrooper outfit and use an Imperial shuttle to depart from Mustafar. His shuttle had no clearance to leave, but there were no life forms aboard, so who knew? The Empire had a bad track record of letting unmanned craft escape as it was, so no biggie. Due to Yularen taking command, the disappearance of this random Imperial shuttle had him locking down everything. He didn't want anyone entering or leaving. If there were any TIEs on patrol, they had one chance to get back into the station before they were left behind. This move kept the Millennium Falcon from entering the space station. The Death Star didn't want anyone near them, especially not some smuggler scum. They could look, but no touching. Without access to the super weapon, they got to analyze it before it jumped into hyperspace. Han wasn't going to chauffeur these people from Tatooine around anymore, so he dropped them off somewhere nearby close to Alderaan, and they could find their own way from there. Luke was adamant that they try and get into the Death Star, but Han told Luke that there was no way. That Imperial Station was locking everyone out of it. Luke's little mission would have to hold off, as they looked at the Death Star and it jumped into hyperspace, sending a shockwave of energy backwards and disabling the Falcon, sending it into a spiral, one of which Han and Chewie had to fix before it crashed into debris. Vader returned to Mustafar and he found a spare suit. However, there was no need for wearing something so heavy. He ended up wearing a cloak and the Vader mask to cover his absent face. Without knowing it, he looked like the ancient Sith Lord, Nihilus. There were both wounds in the Force, and Vader was only beginning to understand his powers. But what remained was his biggest care in the world. Where was his son, and how could he find him? On Coruscant, Palpatine informed elite commandos across the galaxy to look for anyone by the name of Skywalker. Their orders were as simple as they had been since the fall of the Republic. Test the midichlorian count, and if it was high, bring them to Coruscant. If it was low, execute them. There could be no loose cannons. These Imperial units moved out quickly, and the Dark Lord prepared for what would become the most difficult part of having a new student, finding it. Obi-Wan and Luke would be dropped off at Kamaz, which was right next to Alderaan, and Han wished them luck on whatever next endeavors they faced. Obi-Wan was disappointed, but he didn't have a whole lot of credits, and he had no clue where the Rebel base was. The last Rebel he interacted with was Ezra Bridger, but they never spoke about Rebel bases. Plus, the base Ezra was familiar with was likely relocated or abandoned, which was true. It was impossible to keep up with the rebels. They consistently bounced around, and Luke tried to ask where or what they might do. Obi-Wan was insistent that they try and search for the rebel base. He would train him in the ways of the Force as they did. Luckily, at least under his belief, the Empire wouldn't be searching for him. The Lars residence was completely destroyed, and despite how large Imperial databases could be, they most likely didn't have any Luke Skywalkers in their name list. Even if so, he would technically be reported dead in the Lars fire. They'd be able to remain under the radar for a while. Luke wanted to know if they would be able to search for the rebel base, or if they'd be doing the training first. Ben told him that their first and most important directive was training him in the ways of the Force. At this point, he was too old to be fighting in wars like he used to. He needed Luke to carry on the torch, and if they couldn't find the rebels, then they had to search for Yoda and do training with him. Obi-Wan didn't know how much of the hidden path was left, but if they were still around, then the chances were that Luke could mount up with other Jedi and prepare to fight the Empire. They still at this point had no clue that Vader was quote-unquote dead, and Ben was withholding Luke's lineage from him. The proper time would present itself, but not now, even though now was probably the best time to do it. As the Death Star made itself scarce, Vader began his search for his son, and cities continued looking for his next apprentice. Despite the Alliance being fully aware of the Death Star but not how to destroy it, they didn't have a target to hit. Their scouts couldn't find the super weapon, and on top of that, they were trying to regather their forces after the loss at Scarif. The following several months would be ones of confusion and uncertainty. Without the imminent destruction of the Death Star, the Empire felt like an unconquerable foe, even for those who didn't despise it. They realized how much of a threat the Empire was, but Sidious specifically made sure Yularen, who was now the acting Grand Moff, wouldn't move the space station into visibility of any local systems unless ordered to. Currently, the battle station was sitting outside Meriton to stay protected. Palpatine within this time frame had his own
Ordinary dish soaps can leave invisible grease behind. Only Dawn Platinum removes 99% of grease.
own little ally, which wasn't an ally, more of a prisoner until they became an apprentice or died. Luke and Obi-Wan were getting a little somewhere, but they still hadn't found the rebels. They also didn't get anywhere close to the Death Star, and they needed to get the Death Star plans to the people that could actually do something with them. Luke almost sent the plans out galaxy-wide, but Obi-Wan stopped him, telling him that the longer the Empire didn't know about their little weakness, the better of a chance the Alliance had at actually defeating the super weapon. Luke's actual Jedi training was difficult for him. They had a small ship, nothing nearly as large as a Falcon, but large enough to have 2 rooms. Obi-Wan took Luke to Dagobah, but they couldn't stay for long. Obi-Wan actually encouraged them to leave, and they tried to bring Yoda with them, but he denied. They couldn't stay because of the super weapon, which the former Grand Master was actually understanding of. For the wound in the Force, life was isolating. He fed when he needed, but he didn't require it the same way Nihilus did. The one thing Vader wanted more than anything in the galaxy was to find his long-lost son. He tried using echoes to the Force, but without the proper instructions, he couldn't take advantage of the easier way to find his child. Instead, he traversed the massive galaxy, avoiding any interaction with the Empire or the Emperor. Rumors had been circulating that Palpatine had a new ally, but no one was actually sure. Vader heard these rumors, and they only fueled his anger. Luckily, the rumors circulating around this new apprentice never depicted a young man, one that would be his son's age as it was. So he wasn't concerned about Luke becoming a servant of evil. Vader did everything he could to learn about being a wound in the Force, but there wasn't a whole lot of information on it. Turns out Palpatine considered turning himself into one, until he realized that it would pretty much be counterproductive in the long run. Sure, he could technically live for eternity, but his lust for power could turn into an insatiable quest for hunger, one that could kill him. He could not be taken down that path either because it would pull him from the most important focus in the galaxy for him, being Emperor. Sidious instead made any and all information about wounds inaccessible. He feared that Vader, like him, would look to become one, but Vader hadn't ever heard of them before. It was an even more isolating life than it was before for Vader, but after about a year of searching, and one more use of the Death Star, Vader would find his son with Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was a hard sight for him, because he was hoping this entire time that he could turn Luke to the dark side and use him as a means to kill Palpatine, so that they could rule the galaxy together as father and son. When he found Luke working through the light side with Obi-Wan, he was almost enraged, but then he slowly calmed down and decided that perhaps there was another approach to this. When Vader found Luke, he didn't reveal himself. He watched Obi-Wan and Luke train before deciding to make his move. Vader snuck into their vessel and waited until they lifted off the ground, because there was nothing more settling than a literal ghost inside of a spaceship. Naturally, when the dark cloak and mask appeared, Luke ignited his weapon, and Obi-Wan came running out to see what the commotion was for. Upon seeing Vader, he realized that he would return from the dead to exact revenge. But that wasn't quite the case. Vader wanted to help his son, maybe even Obi-Wan too, but he ended up here after nearly a year because he wanted to save his son. Vader, like his master, twisted the truth so he could get the best outcome for himself. He wasn't here to turn Luke to the dark side. That was never his intention, quote unquote. He was here to protect him from the Emperor. As kind as this sounded, Obi-Wan wanted to know how Vader was here, and he said that he was a wound in the Force, created from the destruction of Alderaan. Obi-Wan was surprised, but he was glad that some semblance of Anakin did actually seem to remain. He still never told Luke the truth about his father, and this would be the perfect time to actually inform him of the real fate of Anakin Skywalker. What a painful way to learn the actual truth, too. But to learn the truth from a ghost dad and Obi-Wan made it a little easier to swallow, ironically. Not entirely, but at least he knew the actual truth this time, and at least his father wasn't totally evil. They weren't sure yet, but it seemed like Vader didn't want anything but to protect his son from the Emperor. This led to him being extremely grateful for Obi-Wan and his mandate to train Luke. Without it, who knows what the Emperor might have done if he found him. Despite the semi-pleasant reunion of brothers and father and son, the three of them still weren't prepared enough to take on Palpatine, let alone find where the Alliance was. Ironically, even though a year had passed, they were still safely secured on Yavin. Their unit had grown, thanks to the likes of General Syndulla, but there was still so much further they needed to go. They didn't know where the Death Star was stationed at, and they didn't know when it might strike again. There was a lot of tension. The two planets destroyed left people with mixed feelings. There were more people willing to join the war on behalf of the Alliance, but there were also more people more afraid of the Empire than ever before. Back with Luke, Vader, and Obi-Wan, the Wound in the Force tried to see if there was anything Obi-Wan might know that could help him, but there wasn't. Vader had been using Force Drain to maintain his current structure, but he desired a physical body now. Since he found Luke, he believed he could use Sidious as that potential physical host. Because Anakin didn't want Obi-Wan to suffer any more for his own mistakes, and didn't want Luke to face the Emperor, Anakin told them that he would make the ultimate sacrifice, as long as they promised to find the Alliance, destroy the Death Star, and defeat the Empire. This was an ultimatum neither wanted to accept. Obi-Wan was a lot more accepting of it than Luke was, but since Anakin seemed to be the one present within the wound, he didn't want Anakin to die once again. But perhaps, at least from Obi-Wan's perspective, it was fair. He committed thousands of atrocities as Vader. Perhaps this would be a chance to make a right of so many wrongs. Truthfully, Anakin could die happy. He got to spend about a week with his son and his best friend. It was a pretty good deal in his opinion. He couldn't complain about it, and he finally would be able to make up for what he had done for the last 20 years. His only question was how he would accomplish it. Luke and Obi-Wan decided within a moment of each other to hand their lightsabers over to him. Anakin would take his own and Obi-Wan's blades to Coruscant, where he would find and destroy Sidious. His only objective was to win. As this happened, Luke and Obi-Wan would continue their search for Yavin. Vader had their frequency in case he survived and wanted to find them. The frequency was one that could only be used once, so if it wasn't Vader, the Empire wouldn't be able to track them down forever. When Vader eventually arrived at the former Jedi Temple, now Imperial Palace, he was disgruntled. He hated Sidious with everything in his heart, and all of that anger and resentment bled out into the crystals he used. He was more a beacon of energy than man now. He was able to connect with objects like kyber crystals a lot easier, and they fed off his energy. So all of this darkness swirling around made them turn into crimson crystals. As he marched into the building and ignited the lightsabers, he marched up the stairs and dragged the blades across them. When he got to the top, he stopped. Next to the Emperor was his daughter. She was scarred from the blast, but still alive. Sidious looked up and saw Vader. He couldn't believe his eyes. How did he survive? Vader spun the blades in his hands and told Sidious to release Leia. The Dark Lord looked down at her and then looked back to his former apprentice. He shook his head and stood up, telling Vader that he shouldn't have come home. He had been replaced by someone that would actually live up to his former potential. Sidious shot lightning forward at Vader, but he created an X with his blades to block the strike. Sidious saw how little Vader was affected by this as he lunged forward, swinging at his former pupil. Vader stepped back. Without the blocking of his suit, he was able to harness not just the Force but the full range of his movements, and then some. Without physical limitations on his body, he moved fluidly, even more so than Palpatine. As the Dark Lord tried to cut through Vader, he realized that something was off, and then a grin crossed his face. He couldn't kill Vader with a straight fight, but he could kill him through an execution of the Force. Anakin could see what Palpatine was preparing to do, so he threw his daughter's communication frequency before reaching out his hand and covering Sidious's hands, and with the Force joined into what his former teacher was trying to do. Palpatine was going to use all of Anakin's energy and condense it into a ball of the Force and let it combust. It would kill Anakin and it wouldn't affect him. However, now that Skywalker caught on to it, there'd be no escaping. Sidious realized and tried to pull out, attempting the essence transfer, hoping that Anakin would trap himself within the Elder body and destroy himself inside of Sidious. But Skywalker, after having harvested on so many, knew how at the very least to lock on the Sidious, and that's what he did. This dropped Sidious's body into the ground lifelessly, and sent both the Dark Lord and his apprentice across the galaxy into the clones on Exegol. The fight became one of light and dark, as Anakin embodied everything he was meant to be in the first place. He conquered his demons and released the darkness, closing himself off from his pain and embracing the light. As he did, he forced...
Who cleans this best?
Come on.
Tide. Get 3 times the cleaning power when you switch to Tide.
Forced Palpatine from his own meant to be in the first place. He conquered his demons and released the darkness, closing himself off from his pain and embracing the light. As he did, he forced Palpatine from his own clone and allowed the Dark Lord to end himself. The dark side was too powerful for the clones, but the light wasn't, and as a result, the wound that was Darth Vader consumed Sidious. Skywalker, therefore, became himself inside of a new body, one that was meant to go to Palpatine, and he was confused. Sidious cried out in agony before his spirit was consumed by the hole that once was Darth Vader. Skywalker looked up, feeling his physical body again, and feeling the light. He wasn't heavy, his hands were there, and when he looked up, he saw Sith Eternal Loyalists. They all thought he was Sidious, so they bowed to him and awaited his next orders, and he told them to dismantle everything, as he then fled from the hidden Sith world. They didn't understand, but in an effort to act like his devious master, he told them that he no longer had a need for them. The Sith won. They should honorably do away with themselves for having served their purpose. Being that this was in line with Sidious, the final order itself would be done away with as Anakin fled Exegol. Skywalker would return to the galaxy to search for his children and for Ben. When he found them, they would have revealed everything to the Rebel Alliance. They were preparing for their attack on the Death Star, one that would lead the Alliance to garnering support from the wider galaxy. Without Sidious, the Empire fell into a state of chaos, but contingency orders designed to keep it afloat went to action immediately. Due to a full year of living under the fear of the Death Star, the people reacted extremely negatively to the rise of these contingency plans. So much so that even formerly loyal core worlds turned against Palpatine's former regime. The rebellion's new support would allow them a chance to strike at the heart of the Empire. This of course didn't happen immediately. It took nearly 2.5 more years for the Empire to be turned on its head. In this time, Anakin would have the chance to rekindle his relationship with his children. It would never be the same, but he would learn how Leia survived Alderaan. Due to him suggesting she be put into prison, she was on the far side of the Devastator when it was hit with a tectonic plate from Alderaan. It saved her life, but Palpatine eventually got a hold of her and tried to break her, which he didn't. As a result of the mental turmoil she suffered under Palpatine, she'd focus her path on being a Jedi. Anakin would feel terrible for everything that preceded his return from being a wound in the Force, and he would do everything he could to make up for it. While the Jedi might not seek revenge, the freedom fighters of the galaxy had a different feeling about this. He may have not worn the mask anymore, but he still committed the crimes. To Anakin, there was one way out of this, and it was by making it up to the people of the galaxy. While they wouldn't ever recognize him as the person he was now, he still believed he owed it to the people to be a better iteration of himself. Yoda and Obi-Wan would oversee the training of Luke and Leia as they grew into Jedi Knights. By the time they became Knights, Anakin would return to the Jedi, not to become one, but to be a part of the rebuilding. The birth of the New Republic would be aided by the fall of the Imperial Remnant. In the years that followed, thanks to Anakin making sure everything Palpatine tried to prepare for couldn't come to fruition, the Remnants would never get off the ground. As for the Jedi, their order would grow with new members such as Rey and Grogu, as they, thanks to the sacrifice of the wound in the Force, would have a chance to grow into a new and reborn Jedi Order. And that, my friends, is our Grand Tier special. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Django Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weeble 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legally Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Luke Denwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Swimming otherwise, go check out the Patreon. Super cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So I had a couple different ideas rolling around for how I wanted this to go, but the main thing I kept coming back to is how Anakin's usage of being a wound in the Force wouldn't be so overpowered that you couldn't believe it being in the movies. I don't believe he would know what a wound in the Force was until it became it, and so that's why there's kind of that goofy moment where he's kind of screwing with stormtroopers because he can, and they wouldn't really know how to react to it. And so as he's kind of experiencing this, he's learning more things about it because, as said in the story, he doesn't really have any other information about this, aside from Nihilus, which is thousands of years removed. Almost in a way that had he become a wound in the Force prior to the originals, then he could have technically been put into one of those Palpatine clones, and having used the light, if he used the light, could have actually come back to being a physical person. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
That's the end of that. Bye for now, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. I'll put the PPS Stories channel in the description below, so you can check out this original video for yourself. And bye for now. Oh, and don't forget to check out my reaction playlist too to see more of my reactions. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And again, bye for now. I'll see you guys next time. See ya.